Recycling 2-year-old awards, right? But no, it's really amazing. I want to give a big shout out to Kiracofe Arena for bringing together these in-person and hybrid events. There's a whole
large crowd online joining us, so thank you guys all from the ether and all around the world, but especially for everyone that's here in person. It's really quite an amazing privilege just to be face-to-face with people again and actually see an audience and to actually be able to have real contact and bring humanity back into this. My name is Philip Kiracofe. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Startup Bootcamp Afrotech, and we are a Pan-African accelerator program, a world-class accelerator program operating right here on the African continent. We have our campus, our first campus was in Cape Town, but we've actually now launched a campus in Dakar. So for the better part of starting last year as the COVID restrictions started to drop off, and now this year, we've actually been resuming our in-person scouting efforts where we go all over the continent to find startups. So today, I want to talk about corporate startup collaboration in Africa. And this is a topic that's incredibly important as we talk about innovation, more so than really anywhere else in the world. And the reason is because there's startups here that are doing incredible stuff, but in order to get access to scale, they need route to market. So I want to give a quick video that kind of highlights a little bit about what we do, and then I'm going to delve into some more of the detail. No. Can you maybe hit the... We'll have to manually do this. Watch this. Magic. Apparently there's no audio. This is my voiceover. Yeah. Well, I'll fill space while we do a little bit of technical stuff. So we've had the privilege of being in, I think, 7 countries this year as part of our scouting effort. And what that means is that we get on the ground, face-to-face, sit across the table from the leading startups in each of those countries. So even just to get to one of our fast-track events, we already have usually several hundred applications for 10 people to come, 10 founders to come and meet with us face-to-face. When we have that program, it gives us a half day with each of the startups, and it enables us to really have an opportunity to not only evaluate them for our program, but also give value back to them. And one of the things that's most important, obviously, in this ecosystem is that for our program in particular, even though there's only 10 startups that can get in, we see face-to-face about 250 startups a year. And our goal is to make sure that every single one of those startups benefits from this kind of collective wisdom that we've gained by doing this program since 2017 when we first started. And even in fairly short conversations, we can help those startups to see a critical pivot opportunity. We can help them with, are we ready? Okay, cool. So with that, let me jump into the video, and this will show you some of the clips of our trips as well. Or not. Yeah. Okay. We can skip the video. It's fine. We'll just go on. Is it going to work? So on these fast-track events, what it allows us to do is to hear pitches from startups, but also see how we can help them pivot. And one of the key things is that we've seen so many similar types of startups from all across the continent that we can start to see regional nuances, but we can also help cross-pollinate. So a payments wallet in Kenya that we might have seen many times in West Africa or Southern Africa could have a very different application just because the reality is on the ground, or the adoptions of mobile money, or nuances from user behavior. So we can bring expertise that we've seen from other founders into those local areas, and we can help them to gain their process. Are we skipping it? Okay, cool. So one of the key things that's in this video is this rapid urbanization. So we talk about the fact that over the next 80 years, the continent of Africa is going to see a growth rate from about 4x where we are today, which is a staggering number. But even more so is that almost all of this growth is happening in urban areas. So if you look at between 2015, when there was only 9 cities on the whole continent that had more than 5 million people, to 2030, when there will be about 23 countries, 23 cities, already growing over 5 million people, right? And by the end of this century, by the end of this century, 13 of the 20 largest cities on the entire planet are going to be African cities. So just think about the implications of that. Think about like how many people in the world, even in Africa, would be able to even name some of these cities that are going to be one of the 20 largest, right? The 3 largest cities in the world are all going to be African cities. So it's going to fundamentally change the ecosystem, the global socio-economic, geopolitical, all of the stuff, everything's going to change because the fastest growing markets already are in Africa, and that's going to continue to be the case. But by the end of this century, 1/3 of all the people on the whole planet are going to be African. So this is going to be the biggest market. It's the fastest growing market. It's the largest youth market by a significant margin. And all of this growth, as I said before, is happening in urban areas, which are ill-equipped, right? So how many of you guys dealt with traffic this morning, right? So here in Joburg, which is a pretty systematized major metropolitan, if you doubled or tripled the size of this, already the traffic doesn't work, and it's obviously going to get much worse. We all know and love our, electricity challenges. In Cape Town, a couple years ago, we dealt with water, restrictions that nearly brought us to day zero. And across Africa, it's much, much more challenging. So those, and then of course you start to deal with food, you start to deal with clothing, you start to deal with logistics, everything doesn't work. And it doesn't work well now, and it's not going to work if you double, triple, quadruple, or more the population growth. So the challenges but in those challenges, there's also incredible opportunity, and that's what we like to focus on. With that, opportunity is not for external people to come in and bring solutions that have worked elsewhere in the world and say, hey, this is an awesome solution that worked for traffic in Los Angeles, let's apply it to Lagos, right? But rather that it's the people that are on the ground that are dealing with the conditions every single day are the ones that are coming up with these solutions. And these are the African founders, which is why we are perpetually hounding, yelling from the top of our voices that we are scouting, we scout, skill, and scale African solutions for African challenges. Okay? So the people in this room, the founders that are pitching for these awards are the ones that are dealing with the challenges every single day, and they can bring actual solutions that are relevant because they can test them in the field. So the route to market that I was mentioning at the beginning is that corporate partners already have large access to these markets. So while there are a few standout examples of startups, mostly in Nigeria, B2C startups that have raised significant chunks of change to go out and launch consumer-facing solutions, in most cases what we have is startups that are B2B or B2B2C, and those startups are the ones that are leveraging off of the back of already existing access points. Okay? You don't need to go out and convince millions of customers to use your product if you can partner with a corporate that already has millions of customers, and they're desperate to find new solutions for their customers. So that corporate startup collaboration is an ingrained piece. Okay? So Whether it's mentor, so we bring all of these components together. We work with universities, investors, mentors, governments, startups, and the corporate partners. And I'm going to talk a little bit about like how that plays out in real life. But the beauty is that each partner can bring its respective strengths and can leverage off of the contributions of the other. Okay? So traditionally, corporate partners are quite constrained. Their normal approach to this is a closed innovation system. They want to hold on to their internal IP. They want to develop things in-house. They want to own everything. And as they go through this funnel, they are looking to, obviously it's only a small number of these solutions that are going to make it to market, and the rest of it just stays inside the organization. So that's a very limiting approach. It's slow, it's expensive. Okay? Open innovation it expands that significantly. It doesn't stop that internal process, but what it says is that organizations are willing to look beyond the boundaries of their firm. They're willing to accept external innovations coming inside the organization. There's also internal innovations that are spinning out of the organization and going to market at an earlier stage. Sometimes it can be white label, sometimes it can be a sale, sometimes it can be joint ventures. There's lots of different ways that this shows up. And if you see kind of the dots along the bottom, this idea is that these internal and these external collaborators can be involved in the R&D process at every step of the way, from the beginning all the way to a very late stage in the case of acquisitions. So the reason this is so important, and even more so really in the last 2 years, is because previously we spent a lot of time going into corporations and saying, hey, look, someday you're going to be disrupted. Someday, there's going to be a challenge to your business, and you talk about Netflix, and you talk about Uber, you talk about Airbnb. Companies like, yeah, of course, yeah, we know, we got to do this. We'll put this, we'll allocate our budget, and we'll get on it, next quarter, next year, whatever. And then suddenly COVID came along, right? Because prior to COVID, most of these businesses felt like they were really, they're the Titanic. They're cruising along, like, we're indestructible, right? We're growing along at our steady, predictable pace, and then COVID comes along and everybody loses, 30, 40, 50, 60%. In some cases, some industries like shut down altogether. And so now we're on the other side of that and they're slowly coming back, but the idea that they can get back even to their pre-COVID levels is difficult, but certainly they're not going to be growing at anywhere, all of their previous growth models have gone out the window. So now, we never have to go into a company and say, hey, someday you might be disrupted, right? Everybody now has a very clear, visceral experience of what happens in that black swan moment when disruption comes and takes out your core business. So the predictable growth trajectories are very slow, and typically in most corporates at 5%, 7%, year on year over a 5-year span. But the only way you're going to get a material increase and a boost in that is from additional growth that's innovating within the core, so taking existing products and finding new markets, new pivots around those, but also radical new business models, new products, new services that are outside of what you've done in the past. And so that's really where we support corporate partners in looking at those. You probably have seen these, 3 horizons, but most corporate partners spend almost all of their time focused on Horizon 1. It's just their core products, their core innovations, and again, that's where you're going to see, maybe 5% year-on-year growth, but you're only going to get material big boost if you jump into Horizon 2, Horizon 3, which is new categories of businesses and segments, and radically different businesses and services that are and business models. So lean startup methodology, all the startups in here are going to be very familiar with this. Basically corporates hate this process, but if we can focus, you fall in love with the problem, we validate that, only then can you move on to validating your solution through iterative processes and finally validating the business models. But we do this very successful with them, and a lot of the ways that we do this is through internal work as well as through working through our accelerator. So the accelerator model, finally, the 3 pillars, product innovation, process innovation, and business model innovation, means that in many cases they don't have to actually develop anything new. They can take existing products or existing customers and just pivot the way that they relate to those products and customers, and that can result in entirely new models. Okay? So we work with lots and lots of big companies. Many of them you'll see have offices in South Africa, but globally we've worked with probably a third of the Fortune 1000 companies. This process is very well vetted, and it's become quite refined. And in the current accelerator model, we have we have corporate partners, we have government partners, including DARE from Senegal, and I think it was mentioned yesterday as we were talking about the Startup Act. They were the second country on the continent to launch a Startup Act. Their government is incredibly progressive, going so far as to bring external partners like ourselves into a campus. We physically sit in the Ministry of Entrepreneurship and run a campus, a startup campus, where all the startups can come and work out of that office. So every day when government officials, dignitaries, and foreign visitors are coming, they walk through the mezzanine, and here's a campus of founders, all smashing away, and not just Senegalese startups, right? That we've brought the 10 best startups from all around the continent. They're physically sitting there at the Ministry of Entrepreneurship in Senegal. So it's their way of declaring, hey, we're here. Like this is the hub. This is the start of it. And so we had more than close to 2,300 applications for this accelerator program, and I just want to very quickly kind of highlight that Southern Africa is now starting to lag behind. We're really seeing a significant amount of traction from West Africa, from East Africa, even MENA, and Southern Africa. The quality is quite high, but the number of applications, the number of startups that we're seeing applying from here is dropping. So, not concerning for us because, again, as I said, the quality is still very, very high, but it is interesting for us to really continue to try to push that funnel so that the startups like yourselves are getting the support that you need. So more than half the startups that have applied for our program, about 60%, 65% of the startups that are applying for our program, 55% are at least 3 years old. And what that means is these are definitely, we're starting to attract later stage startups that have much more traction. And again, they're seeing the value of being in these programs because of the corporate partners. They understand that they've done a good job of scaling to a certain stage within their country or within a small region, and are ready now to leap up into, to jump across to a much wider geographic area, or expand out of their initial industry. Most of the startups are in the startup stage, but about 28% are in growth and mature stage startups. And not surprisingly, we see a tremendous amount of agri-tech startups, supply chain. That's just one of the massive problems that we know exist in Africa. There's huge issues with food security, with food waste, and all manner of solutions around agri-tech. So that's very exciting. Of course, the traditional ones, IoT, connectivity, clean tech, fintech, machine learning, digital health, all of those are very strong across the continent. We've had quite an exciting number of startups, many of the ones you'll recognize, and I'm going to jump into a couple of the ones from Southern Africa here in a second. This is the current program that we're running in Dakar. So we've already had 10 startups complete the first program in September of last year. And the new program is just starting in April. And so these are the Southern African startups. So we've had some really extraordinary startups. Two of the ones were here last night at the party, Rentosa and Brandbook. We're talking about upcoming funding rounds. Can't share any sort of details yet. They haven't been announced, but it continues to demonstrate that startups in South Africa, Southern Africa, can find significant rounds. And in particular, the investors that are coming in are strategic investors. They're coming from industry backers more so than just straight VC funds, which means that these are partners that are looking not only to invest money, but also gain access to their channels. And again, you'll see announcements in the short term about some of those, but they're quite significant sums of money and relevance that are very exciting. So I want to just spend a few moments talking about one of the other work that we do is helping to do the venture building within corporate partners. And Unilever is a partner that we've done a lot of work with. So just by virtue of the fact that they're, this is a lot of the details of the projects are confidential, I'm going to have to be a little bit vague. But we, a very large publicly stated, goal for Unilever is reduction of plastic waste. And we know that their brands are some of the most popular ones in this country and across Africa, which means that their packaging ends up being a significant contributor to landfill and waste. Whereas their packaging, the vast majority of it is entirely recyclable. It just doesn't make it back. So there's a lot of initiatives around that. And one of the interesting projects that we did with them was on looking at how can we get consumers to bring back packaging and refill them, right? So in products like laundry, where you have powders, how do consumers feel about this process? So of course they can go out and they can do market surveys, and they can get all this feedback, but they come to us because they say we actually want to create a startup that can do this, that can validate this, that can validate the problem, that can look at potential solutions around this. And that was one of the projects that we ran with them last year. That's ongoing, and it's been it's really quite extraordinary to see how inexpensive that process can be when you actually apply lean startup thinking to a problem like that. So we had we were filling buckets with laundry powder. We were taking them to stores. We were testing them on consumers. We did some fake brand test where we kind of created a different brand that wasn't something that consumers recognized to see how that went. Then we used existing brands to see would consumers relate better. Got a whole bunch of incredible feedback for the partner. And we're able to truly validate that in fact consumers would do this, and that we could solve this logistics process of packaging coming back, even when you're down at the township levels, that consumers would bring packaging back, would swap it out for new products, and that we could work on that supply chain that solves that problem and ultimately reduces the challenge, or sorry, reduces the amount of packaging that's ending up in landfill or even in recycling, because even we know that even the process of recycling a container is incredibly wasteful, because they're taking this container back and it's being broken down and made into a brand new container. But there's a lot of energy that goes into that. There's a lot of carbon that's released as part of that process. So the ultimate solution, of course, would be no packaging at all, which is other initiatives that are out there. But the next best solution is when you bring that actual container back and you can reuse that same container. And so one of the learnings was that consumers, especially in lower incomes, if you're refilling the container that they brought back, they didn't trust that the product that you were refilling was legitimate, was genuine, right? So the solution ended up being, great, bring back your empty package, hand that over, you take a sealed new package, right, home with you, and then we take that package back, refill it so that it can come back with a sealed lid. So you just start to understand, when you're actually sitting face to face with the consumers, you have real insights that we're able to pass back to the corporate that can help influence the solution on a lean basis. Another one of our startups that we're very, very proud of is a company called Akiba, South African startup, female founder or co-founder, and they are on an absolute tear. So their product initially was launched as a consumer savings. It would help consumers to save by kind of gamifying the process of understanding what consumers were spending money on, and kind of convincing them, giving them rewards for savings, which is again the solution that we've seen in many places. They had some AI that was pretty clever, but they really started to gain traction around this idea of taking that consumer behavior and using that to create this alternative credit scoring. And so that's where they started to gain some real traction, and then COVID hit. So in the midst of COVID, of course, consumer spending dropped, and their business took a bit of a step back. And they were looking around trying to figure out, okay, what's our pivot? And they happened to be in a conversation with a landlord of one of the largest commercial landlords of malls in South Africa. And the problem that they were facing, and we all know this, we watched this happen, is that a large number of the tenants of these malls were closing. The tenants, they couldn't operate doing lockdown or, and many restrictions, so they were just closing down. Many of them were very good businesses, and they were asking for credit, they were asking for extension on their terms, they were asking for the landlords to give them some sort of relief. Landlords, of course, other financial sources, but the landlords are saying, okay, but how do we know, I've got 100 tenants in my mall, how do I know which ones I should be giving money to and which ones aren't ever going to come back? And it turns out that Akiba was able to take that data, that their transactional data of the retailers themselves, the small businesses, run it through their models and spit out scores that were able to tell the landlord on a differentiated basis, these are the ones that are most likely to recover, these are the ones that are most likely, these are the ones that have the best chance of surviving, and these are the ones that you should probably just let go. And that ended up being a phenomenal pivot for Akiba. And in the course of last year, their revenue increased 15 times what it was at the beginning of last year through that pivot. So it's just an example of startups working with corporates and finding really fascinating solutions that they can scale. So finally, we are a fund and we're very proud of our metrics. We just want to highlight that. So this is the number. This is based on startups that have completed our program at least more than 1 year ago. So that there's more than 30 startups. So there are 30 startups that have completed our program more than a year ago. Of those, 14% have failed, which gives us an 86% success rate. One of the factors we're most excited about is that of those, about 40% have not needed any follow-on funding after the program. So they're operating and scaling and growing on the basis of the commercial traction that they've gained largely through this corporate startup collaboration. They've been able to get big clients and find these JV partnerships that have enabled them to continue to scale. Now, eventually they probably will raise money, but they'll do so at a much later stage and a much higher valuation than they would have done had they been coming right out of the program and trying to raise money. So the ones that have raised money, half of all the startups that have come through our program have raised follow-on funding. And the multiple is a 50x increase. Now, it's an absurd number, but it's somewhat skewed because of Kuda, which is our kind of outlier startup. They came through in 2018. They're currently valued at more than $500 million. So even if we take that out of the picture, the multiple for all of the other ones, the 13 other startups, is more than 10x when they were in our program. So again, those multiples are a reflection not of our program, but rather of this kind of corporate startup collaboration where they're saying that investors are much more keen to invest in startups that have this kind of B2B2C model or these joint venture or these opportunities to scale off of the back of what other people, what these large corporates and government organizations have established. So so they've raised a lot of money, but most importantly for us is that we are helping to take startups and produce an 86% success rate of startups coming through the program that are out having a large impact on the African continent. So thank you very much for the time to share, and I'm happy to answer a quick question or two, I think, if there's time. Yeah, I'll look for the MC to keep us on time. But yes.
Being recorded, the mic is important. And for you to just stand. Thanks.
Thanks, Philip.
Yep.
A lot of the conversation was around, the value that Startup Bootcamp brings to startups to facilitate this corporate startup interaction. I guess the question, I suspect for the majority in the room, is like, that's not always an option. So, what's your experience and what's your kind of recommendations around how, I guess, a startup who's not in Startup Bootcamp thinks about engaging with corporates and their path to engaging outside of an accelerator like yours?
Sure. Yeah, it's in no way intended to be, self-promotional. I mean, there's many other great programs that are operating here, that we would love. We always give a shout out to, Founders Factory, Plug and Play, even Africa Arena, do help facilitate that. But for startups that don't have, that are not in one of those programs, well, I'll take a step back. The reason that the programs like ours exist are because we help bridge the gap. Corporates and startups just don't mix very well. It's the kind of classic oil and water, you can put them together, but you're just going to see the little globules running around. Usually when oftentimes when I'm starting a new sprint or a new boot camp with one of our corporate partners, like a Unilever, we'll use the example of, kind of the human body's antibodies, where you've got these, we've all learned a lot about T cells and white blood cells, that are running around killing off, foreign invaders. But that's really what happens in the corporate. The corporates are designed, their very nature is to be, in their case, a repeatable, scalable model, which is they want ultimate efficiency at a very high scale. So they don't want any deviation from a process, right? They want to be able to produce millions and millions of widgets, running through this factory, and anything that's a slight off that can disrupt that process is actually a negative. So the whole corporate machine is designed to clear out those inefficiencies, those imperfections, which is exactly what a startup is doing, right? So the very nature of what a startup is doing and what a corporate doing, don't mix. So the reason that programs like ours help to bridge that gap is because corporates need a small labs environment. They need a very willing champion in the organization that has the vision, that has a resource, that has a budget to be able to say, hey, we can do this project with you. And unfortunately, that's just exceedingly hard to find. And we oftentimes will say, just as an example, these 250 startups that we meet throughout the year, the ones that don't get into our program, we are still always making introductions. Hey, you should contact such and such a person at this organization. You should contact this person at this government organization. You should contact, we make the introductions. And, it's a warm introduction. The person responds, yeah, I'd love to talk. Let's have coffee. But almost nothing ever comes out of it because they just don't have, their job, their KPIs, the corporate executive, their job and KPIs are all based around an existing linear set of things, right? And it's, you can bring your solution that says, hey, I can help you do your job 10x better. And they're like, that's great, but I don't have the risk appetite, I don't have the mandate, I don't have the time, to go and find that. It is incredibly hard. What we do say, though, is that your best chance for getting in is to show traction. So in any way that you can, show even a small pilot, even if you have to kind of self-fund it, or kind of hack it together, if you can do that, and then you can go to that corporate and say, hey, look, here's what we did with your own products, or a version of your product, or we went to your customers and we were able to sell them our solution, as an add-on to your product or your service. Like, those are things where, you can at least give them a real-world, tangible, a reason to, take the next step and engage with you. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Philip. So I think maybe just one of the things worth talking about is the other side of the coin, where a startup founder will see a sort of a solution to a problem that a corporate has, and then suddenly they pivot their entire business to service this one new client, and almost forget about the track that they were on. And then to your point, they 15x their revenue, and it's suddenly coming from one client, and potentially all of their eggs are in that basket. So how do you sort of de-risk that and make sure the founders are staying focused?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question. So there's a huge benefit to having that pilot, because that is validation. You say, hey, if this company used my product, then here we go. But to your point, it's exactly that. You cannot allow yourself to be to become just too focused on that company. So one of the ways is that in those early days, you will have companies that say, we want to own the IP, right? You're doing this for us, we want to own this IP. Like, that is an absolute no-no. You can license it to them, you can give them short-term exclusivity, you can do specific deals on, hey, here's on this version of the thing I'll do for you, but you cannot, as a startup, ever allow yourself to become indebted or locked up in legal challenges with this corporate partner. The other thing is that as much as possible, you want to use those. You want to be able to use the generic benefit of that solution as early as possible towards other companies like that. So, Akiba didn't stop with just that one client. They went out to other big. Once they saw, hey, this is working really well, for small businesses, they're like, well, who else has small business, tenants? Who else has, who else is looking to provide credit to small businesses? And they were able to now go to, other existing lenders and say, hey, for a long time, you've wanted to provide credit to small businesses, and you haven't had a good way to do that. We can dramatically enhance your credit scoring. We've got this significant new way to increase your credit scoring, de-risk this for you. And another thing that we oftentimes help startups do is find ways to link your traction, your business model to the success of the corporate, right? So a success-based model, which basically says, look, you're providing $100 or 100 Rand worth of credit, and there's a 10% default rate, right? So that means that for every $100, I'll just stick with dollars for generic, but for every $100 that you're spending, it's actually costing you $10, right? Now, we can de-risk that. We can cut that in half, which means that using our product, we're basically paying you $5 to use our product, right? So when you can switch it around in their minds and say, oh, wow, okay, you're going to pay me to use your product, great, like let me go out and do that, that also helps to get more customers willing to take that first step for you, right? And to try it out, because they're like, oh, wait, you're not asking me to pay you, instead you're effectively paying me based on how you've set up your financial model. Yeah, that's great, like I'll do that pilot with you. Right? One more in the front.
Thanks. Hello. It's on? Cool.
Yep.
Thanks, Philip. My name is Priyash from the Awareness Company. What's your best advice for when to disengage engagement with a corporate? So why I'm asking that is because I feel like in South Africa, they're really bad at saying no or not now. They'll always say they'll take the next meeting, they'll take the next engagement, they're really excited. But at some point, I feel like startups, and we're guilty of that, we don't know the process to strategically engage with the corporate. So just what's your best advice for that? Thanks.
Yeah, so as fast as possible, that's why you try to design this light lean experiment, right? You're trying to design a lean experiment that can validate some piece of value for them that's as simple, as easy as possible, right? So if you say, look, we'll run this for 5 of your customers, right? We'll run this for 1 week or 1 month, and a good question always to ask the person you're dealing with is, what's the level of budget that you can approve without needing to go to the next level, right? So they say, cool, I can sign off on projects that are 25,000 Rand, that's within my domain, like I don't need the next level. I can do 25,000 Rand for initiatives that I think could be interesting or supporting. You're like, okay, cool. Well, then now I need to come up with a lean project that fits under 25,000 Rand, right? And if you can do that, then they can sign off on that one. Ideally, it makes sure that when you design it, it comes back with a KPI very rapidly, 2 weeks, 4 weeks max, right? That it comes back with a result, any result, right? That's enough for you to say, cool, this can unlock, now he or she could take this to the next level, and that person can maybe authorize something at 100,000 Rand. And you're like, cool, hey, we did this one for 25,000 Rand. Maybe we had to do it twice, right? But we got some validation from one tiny little group, a department, a manager, somebody, with their actual customers, and then you can take that up. Another thing that we do, we partner very closely with AWS, and one of the amazing things that AWS is able to provide is that And they will work with lots of startups. So of course they work with us, but many others as well. So don't feel like you can't work with them. Just to the question earlier that was asked about what if you're not SBC, AWS is phenomenal as a partner. One of the great things that they do is because they're working with so many corporate partners and clients in South Africa and beyond, they know their infrastructure. They're actually hosting a lot of their infrastructure. Actually has the ability to set up sandbox environments where you can have dummy data, you can have you know, a safe environment which doesn't put their data or their clients or their actual business model at risk. And so if you strike a good relationship with AWS, sometimes you can say, hey, look, we know that you have this client, can we go in and do a joint pitch with you? Like AWS can actually vet your technology, your solution. They can go and they can vouch. They do this with our startups all the time, where they'll put up their hand and say, hey, look, these guys, we've helped them, we've advised them, we've mentored them, we've basically validated or audited their tech, and it's not going to blow up your customer relationship. It's not going to blow up your company. So let's set up a quick sandbox, which they can do, you know, within a day, sometimes a day or two, and let's just run a test. And then you're testing in an environment that the company can see and recognize with a tech partner that they know and trust.